Minister, I now call Deputy Jack Chambers, who has 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. The events of the past few days have been deeply disappointing, and on a personal level, as someone who has lived my whole life with Ireland as a member of the European Union, I feel particularly disappointed for the young people in Britain whose future is now shrouded in such uncertainty. It is truly saddening to see a vote driven in so many ways by a campaign based on fear, hatred and misconceptions, and ultimately the projection of blame on some of the most vulnerable in society. These are the very people the EU was set up to help and protect and provide opportunities for. But it is imperative we now use this time to undergo serious introspection and examine what we need to do here to ensure we are not the ones who pay the price for Britain's decision to exit the EU. Brexit has the potential, if we do not act properly and decisively, to destabilise our economy. The ESRI has calculated that our bilateral trade with Britain could fall by up to 20% and a possible fall in our GDP by 0.5 to 1.2% based on our Treasury estimates. Such change will greatly affect our fiscal space for the years ahead. Again, as with so much of this, a lot of this is speculation and guesswork. We just don't know what is coming around the corner, but we need to be prepared. This is why we need to examine every facet of our own industrial, economic and agricultural policies, among other areas. We have to ask ourselves, do we need to rejig things to respond most effectively to these seismic events? I'm not calling for a knee-jerk reaction. I'm saying we need to take the considered and careful look at everything we do. This approach must be led from the top, from the Taoiseach and the Government and the Parliament. We must all be united and constructive in our approach to this. The consequences of us not responding properly are too severe, particularly as the economy improves and continues to recover and gather pace. On this island, we are in a unique position. I've been deeply disappointed, but not surprised, by the response from Sinn Féin in all this. Now is the time for careful and considered debate, not rash, knee-jerk reactions. But Sinn Féin simply couldn't resist the call and couldn't help themselves in their snap calls for a border poll. A part of me thinks, from the statement from Deputy Gerry Adams and Jeremy Corbyn before the referendum, that the two Jerrys are very similar, and maybe deep down they both secretly wanted a Brexit. The calls for a border poll were opportunistic and cynical. It is no surprise Sinn Féin are using this occasion to batter the EU, as is their wont, with classic negative commentary. I would appeal to them and to all deputies to focus on the values and ideals of what the European community stands for, what it can offer and what people want it to deliver. We need to accept that for whatever reasons, 17 million people in Britain voted to leave the EU. In this current crisis, and taking into account the British result, there is a need for reflection by all European countries and people regarding the disenfranchisement that exists and the disillusionment that many citizens have with the EU. I fully and truly believe in the European project as a process of peace, cooperation, and I know it can deliver economic and social opportunities for all the citizens. However, we must recognise that there is a democratic deficit that requires reform. There are decision-making powers that are excessively concentrated in a European elite. Eurocrats need to be levelled with democracy. Let's take the European Parliament. It is the only true and direct democratic chamber of the collective European people. However, with treaty changes, it has indeed been granted more decision-making powers, but in some cases it is merely providing a democratic slant to an undemocratic system. Now is a time for Ireland to lead a process of reform within Europe to deliver greater outcomes for all citizens. It is worrying to see a number of foreign ministers from the Central European economies meeting together in advance of the European Council meeting with no consultation or engagement from the peripheral countries like Ireland. I fear there will be an excessive input from these countries who have different interests than Ireland in relation to Brexit. From their perspective, the incentive is to force other countries to shy away from entertaining an exit from the European project. This might result in a negotiated exit that is contrary to Ireland's interests. We must ensure that we are central to these negotiations and utilise all diplomatic potential. The consequences for Ireland in terms of trade, travel, peace and future prosperity make this negotiation period crucial in our national interest. We must also advocate for reform within Europe to empower the democratic institution that is the European Parliament, to make citizens more involved and to give greater democratic ownership of decision-making competencies. And I conclude now, Cathaoirleach.
I want to try and squeeze in the last
I'm going to conclude now.
Thank you.
We have pooled our sovereignty over time, but it is important that we democratise the core of the European Union so we can dilute the worrying anti-European sentiment that is apparent in many member states. It has been stated that when people work together, it can show that beyond their differences and geographical boundaries lies a common interest. I'm going to conclude now.
I know.
We won't
get them in otherwise.
One sentence.
Go on.
That common and shared European interest needs to be retained and nurtured for citizens into the future, so the Brexit of today is not reflected by other countries throughout the Union. Monet said that there is no future for the people of Europe other than in union. This is the same today.
Deputy.